Thank you for watching Channel 1. This is BizCheck. My name is Betty Kiptum and Lensa Odingo is my colleague on the sign language interpretation. Now, within the next 45 minutes or so, we shall be talking about carbon markets, understanding them, and just how can communities or individuals invest in carbon markets. To have this conversation is Sarah Njoroge, who is a principal in charge of advisory services at Intellicap. Now, thank you very much, Sarah, for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
The other day, there was a story from Isiolo where 5 conservancies paid the county government 10 million shillings as levy on money that they had gotten from sale of carbon credits. So definitely people, communities are making money, right?
Oh, yes.
Right. So maybe you can just start by telling us what carbon markets are.
Great. So carbon markets is a tool that has been developed to help companies or even governments in meeting their net zero targets. So talking about carbon markets, there are different types of carbon markets. So we have what we call compliance markets, and we also have voluntary markets. So compliance market are, as the name goes, driven by regulation. And I think the oldest such market that we have globally is within the EU region. That is the EU ETS. What we see happening in most of the other areas is what we call voluntary carbon market. This is driven by corporates, individuals that are environmentally conscious and are looking to offset their carbon footprint. So basically those are the two markets that we have. From a regulatory perspective, there has been ongoing developments at a global level, at Africa level, and even at country level here in Kenya. We have been seeing developments around that. I believe we are going to discuss those policies as we go along.
Yes, we shall be discussing that in a little. I am with Sarah Njoroge, who is a principal in charge of advisory services at Intellicap. Thank you for staying with us, Sarah.
Thank you.
Right, maybe you can just recap on the types of carbon markets that there are.
Yeah, so as I was explaining, there are two types of carbon market. So we have the compliance market, and we have what we call the voluntary market. So compliance market are majorly driven by regulation. So where you find the regulator trying to meet a certain net emission position, like a net zero, or to reduce emission by a certain percentage or amount by a specific time. They then bring in the different companies operating, and each of them is assigned like an allowance, which would mark a limit to which each is allowed to emit. So it's more like a license to emit. So what happens is that there are those that will exceed the assigned allowance, and there are those that will not reach it. So that provides a platform for trading, where those that exceeded then buy from those that did not meet, and those that, so the market, the pricing there would purely be determined by demand and supply within the market. Then we have the voluntary market, and this is where now the concept of carbon trading or the carbon credits that we are talking about comes in. So it is voluntary. It is driven by the corporate world and even individuals. So on an ongoing basis, most corporates have been setting their net zero strategies. Yeah? Most of them trying to align to the global target of getting to net zero, say by 2050, or reducing even emission by 50%, say by 2030. So to meet those or to get to those positions, the different entities would try as much as possible to reduce emission from their own operations. But only so much can be reduced. They cannot get to zero by reducing their own emission because business has to continue. So the balance then is what takes them to the voluntary carbon market, where they buy offsets. Maybe the other thing I would need to mention is that the underlying, what's the commodity that is being traded in this market? It is the carbon credits. So the conversation we'll be having is then how do these carbon credits come about? And maybe it's worth mentioning that
Yes,
a
please, go
carbon
ahead.
credit represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide or equivalent gases that has been removed from the atmosphere or avoided from getting into the atmosphere. Yes.
You said that this is an allowance to emit.
Yes.
Isn't this working against what we are working towards? I mean, the Earth is suffering already from the carbon emissions that have been emitted this far, and yet we are giving some people or some individuals or companies allowance to emit.
Okay, so under business as usual, businesses have to emit, right? So the way compliance market work is that there won't be like the offset credits that we are talking about. So let me just give an example. If Kenya was to become a compliance market and with our target of, like say the current one, to reduce our emissions by 32% by 2030, to get to that, the government has to bring in all stakeholders, right, to help us get to that. So the 32%, then they would be able to assess and see what does every participant within the economy, how much do they need to contribute to. So basing on the level and nature of operations, they then assign those allowances. So Company A, this is the much you can emit. Company B, this is the much you can emit. Company C, this is the much you can emit. Okay? So then between these three companies, those that some will exit, that it's like a target, it's like a cap. It's actually called cap and trade.
Yeah.
So you are capped, like this is the much you are allowed to emit. So if you emit more, then you move to buy from the one that didn't exhaust their allowance. Otherwise, in such a market, then there would be penalties and fines too that would be suffered by those that exit. Yeah. So there is a target you are trying to meet. So everybody then should remain within a certain target.
Right. So now let's talk about getting into these markets, how you can get in and trade and, you know, make money out of it. Please tell us, how can especially communities get into these markets?
Okay, so now when you come to trading, that happens in the voluntary market. So it's basically talking about developing the credits. And for the credits to be generated, there needs to be a carbon project. Yeah? There are two different types of credits that are normally traded. There's what we call avoidance credits. So those come from projects that basically avoid or prevent emissions from getting into the atmosphere. And there are those that, you know, reduce the amount of emissions that gets into the atmosphere. And maybe an example of such a project would be renewable energy. It's basically reducing the amount that gets into the atmosphere. Or when you engage in like a forest conservation project, we are looking to reduce logging, meaning we are reducing more atmosphere from getting into the more emission from getting into the atmosphere. And then there is what we call removal credits. So removal credits means that they are removing the emissions that are already in the atmosphere. And under that category, we have two ways. We have the nature-based solutions. Nature-based looks like, you know, the afforestation, reforestation, planting of trees, basically, because trees are natural carbon sinks, meaning they are taking emissions or rather carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through the natural, I would say, biological process of photosynthesis and storing it in their the tree trunk or even within the roots as the tree continues growing. So those are avoidance credit through the nature-based solutions, and there is also now technology-based solutions. There are two of those. One we refer to as the direct air capture. This is direct removal of carbon dioxide, separating it from the other components in the air directly through a chemical process. And there is also carbon capture, utilization and storage. This is where emissions, carbon dioxide to be specific, is being captured from specific operation, like for example, say in a power plant or in an industrial process. So there's the emissions that would basically get into the air. So these are captured before they get into the air. And the storage bit, both methods use geological processes where whatever carbon is captured is stored underground within the rocks. And it is a more permanent way of storing that carbon dioxide. Definitely not all that is captured is stored. A bit of it could be used again in industries like, say, in making carbonated drinks, or even in making building materials, for example, like strengthening steel. Carbon is used. Yeah, so basically those are the markets. Those are the types of credits within those markets. So now once they are generated, they would be of different quality. Like when we talk of removal credits, they are considered to be of higher quality, in the essence that they are actually removing carbon dioxide that was already in the atmosphere. So it's a negative impact. On a net basis, it's a positive impact.
All right.
Yes.
So when you talk about the quality and all that, who regulates this? Who says that this carbon credit is a better quality than this?
Great. So there are standard setting bodies. I think I would mention the two biggest ones that are operating. So we have the gold standard, and we have what we call the verified carbon standard, or VERA. So basically they provide methodologies. These are the methodologies that guide right from the registration, the verification of these projects at the point they are being defined. So when you decide that you want to invest in a carbon market, the first thing would be to check, is there an existing methodology that would be able to guide your project? Because otherwise then you'd have to start by developing one and getting it approved. So what happens is that for the different types of projects, like it could be a renewable energy project, could be a forestry project, could be a clean cook stove kind of a project, each of them would have a methodology described in terms of what needs to be captured, in terms of setting the baselines and monitoring the project over time, all the way to monetizing it. So these standard setters have the registries, and this is where the carbon that is generated is then registered. You see, it's not going to be, it's not, carbon credit is, I would say, a virtual instrument. It's not an actual, a commodity that, it's not a product. So it is registered and a certificate issued. So then trading would happen from there. So they are registered on the registry. It would either be on Vera or Gold, and that's the platform that would be used for, or rather where buyers would come then to identify. So in terms of deciding the quality, there are some that are generally thought to be of higher quality, as I mentioned, like the removal carbon credits would be priced higher than, say, the avoidance. When we talk of the tech-based, the ones that are using tech-based, like the direct air capture, those are also high product. When you talk about forestry, when you do an agroforestry is where you introduce fruit trees to farmers to incorporate as they do their BAU farming. That would be one kind of a project, for example, and there would be a forestry. Those that have additional benefits other than just the benefit of removing or avoiding emissions, those that are bringing additional benefits to communities, and that we call the core benefits, those would again be priced higher. And I think another thing that would be considered is even the project developer themselves, their credibility, their experience. So see, this is a normal market, so the prices would be determined by market forces, talking about supply and demand. So if project developer A is known to follow all the required processes and issue high quality carbon credits, it then means there would be higher demand for those, and subsequently the prices would go up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, this conversation risks getting really technical. When you talk about the tech-based solutions, they seem to be very capital-intensive kind of ventures, right?
Yeah.
So when we talk about communities getting into these markets, the best route they would have to go to is the avoidance projects, yeah?
So it would have to be the nature-based solutions, where is the forestry, the agri-based kind of projects come in. And you are right in saying that the tech-based are actually quite capital intensive. I know we have one that is coming up in Kenya. It's called the Great Carbon Valley, happening in Rift Valley, still under development, yeah. But the benefits would be immense. Like that specific project, the government is aiming to remove about 1 million metric ton by 2030. I mean, that would be significant, even for the government towards meeting its targets for, reducing emissions by 2030. Yeah.
Let's talk about the pricing. Of course, beyond the quality of the carbon credit, how is the pricing model across the world? Are carbon credits produced, say, in Kenya, the same price as those produced in America or other markets?
A good question. So, in addition to what I've mentioned, you'd find that the pricing is actually geographic specific.
Okay.
Like, for example, the credits that are produced within Africa, you'd find they are priced higher than those that are produced, say, in Asia or in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is just in addition to the other factors being market forces and the type of credits themselves. Yeah.
All right. So now for communities who may be, like the conservancies that I mentioned, those ones are in the avoidance project, right?
Yeah.
So for communities who want to take advantage of these markets, they probably have ongoing projects already, but they are not, taking advantage of the markets. How do they get in there?
Interesting. So when a project that is intended to be for generating carbon project is being set up, that needs to be the intention right from the beginning. Yeah.
Okay.
So there are some principles that guide the market, and one of them is called additionality. So a project developer is supposed to demonstrate that the project would not have happened in absence of the carbon finance that is coming in from sale of these credits. Yeah. So ideally, what needs to be demonstrated is that the project itself is reducing emissions more than would have happened in a business as usual situation, right? So, like talking to a conservation project. Conservation is where it is an avoidance project where you are getting communities to commit to protecting, the forests that are around them. So taking the baseline, we would be looking at what was the deforestation rate, say, at the beginning, and then continually monitor how that goes, because we are saying what was the emission rate at the beginning. Then we need to see what is additional, what have we managed to reduce. I don't know whether that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, but again, when it is an agroforestry where we have most farmers coming in, so you provide, or depending on how these projects are structured, so you'd find the project developer probably provides the seedling to the farmers. And then carbon credit would then be accrued to each of the farmer. And maybe what I need to mention at this point is that these carbon projects can be of two types. It can be a standalone project where you get a big project developer, get 10,000 hectares and have their project running there. Or it could be a grouped one where now it's where our farmers would come in, where you have different farmers, but the project has to be homogeneous. So if it is mango trees that you are introducing for the farmers to introduce into their farms. So at the point the project is being set up, it would be described as such. So the project scope would cover all the different, pieces of land accruing to each farmer. Measurements would be taken, the number of trees that each farmer has been able to plant. And then over time, monitoring is a very key aspect. So because the bigger the trees, the more carbon they are able to sequestrate from the atmosphere. So once these are then sold, the revenue would then be shared across the different farmers, proportionate to how much they contributed in terms of the removal. So like when you do the agroforestry project, that's a removal. You are removing carbon from the air. Yeah.
So are you saying that people who already have ongoing projects and maybe did not look at it from this perspective, for that is done?
No, it's not all lost.
Yeah.
So what needs to be done is to probably demonstrate that the operations can be scaled, basically. But the additionality principle has to be met. You cannot be able to claim credit out of a project that was already happening anyway. You cannot come and fence an area and say that I want to earn credits out of a project that was already existing and happening anyway. Yeah.
Right. I'd like to hear from you your thoughts on protecting those communities, you know. The government might decide we now want to do some serious agroforestry in this area and move people out of where they have been, you know, indigenous homes. So how do we ensure that these indigenous communities are being protected even as we look for carbon credits, sorry?
Okay, so there's a process called stakeholder engagement, and it is a very key, critical process in the process of setting up a carbon market. It cannot actually progress and get approved without that process happening. So the project developer needs to demonstrate that they have intensely engaged the communities within the locality where these projects are to be set up, and they need to provide what we call a free, informed, and prior consent. Like, it's not just signing. They need to understand the implication of the project. What does it mean for them? What are going to be their roles and responsibilities? How will income generated flow back to them, you know, and raise all the concerns they have. And part of the approval project is that the developer needs to be able to demonstrate how have they responded to all the concerns that the community had. So basically, there need to be a lot of transparency, and one of the methods we've seen work, and actually I think even the climate change amendment, that bill that was passed the other day, does highlight that at a community level there needs to be set up a committee, and that committee is the one that would handle the distribution of revenue to the farmers. Right. And it needs to have fair representation in terms of composition, having youth, having women, having people living with disability, you know, and also bringing in people from the entire catchment area covered by that project. Yeah.
So now, as we come to a close of the conversation, would you tell us what kind of sensitization is being done? Because it feels like there's a lot of technicality that the communities need to understand for them to even engage in this. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is definitely capacity building that is being done, and I think even today why we are having this conversation is so that the message can, you know, get to the general public, for them to learn that they can be able to participate in this market. One thing I would want to mention is that for a carbon project to be commercially viable, it needs to be of a considerable size. You cannot take 1 acre and say you are starting a carbon project there. But luckily I've just explained that they could be pulled into a grouped project. So I think more can be done, and what we are doing at IntelliCap is actually coming in to help businesses or help even communities, or working with implementing partners to put such groups together and help them through the process. So the registration itself, before the project can actually kick off, it's a very robust, rigorous process. There's a document called the Project Document Design, PDD. That's a document that project developer has to design and get approved, and it's actually clearly defined within the climate change amendment there. So we come in to help clients set up those and even work with implementing people that are actually at the ground to implement such projects and get them registered for the communities. In terms of, as you said, sensitization, I think more can still be done, maybe by bringing more people even on social, on the mainstream media, you know, on social media, through government and even county governments. To just sensitize people, for them to know that there's an opportunity to, you know, run their activities, agricultural activities, for example, but while at it, generate an additional layer of revenue from sale of credits.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'll give you 30 seconds to give us your closing remarks.
Thank you, Betty. So I think I would want to end by mentioning that we have our SunCap Africa Summit coming up. It will be happening in February 28 and 29. And that brings in, you know, different stakeholders, impact investors, entrepreneurs, policymakers, governments and all. And during that summit, we are going to have a carbon session. So we are calling on entrepreneurs that have project ideas, as vague as they may appear, to come and sit with us through our workshop session, where they'll be able to interact with peers who have similar you know, project ideas. And through that, we are going to be able to guide them on how they can turn that idea into money and handhold them through the journey.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for speaking with us.
Thank you so much.
That is Sarah Njoroge, a principal in charge of advisory services at Intellicap, speaking to us about carbon markets and how communities can get involved. That is all we had for you on BizCheck this morning. Kurunzi Mashinani is coming up. My name is Betty Kiptum. Thank you for watching.